Hello and welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor Edit My Photo live stream. This is, my name is Darlene. I was out of sorts for a second there, forgot who I was. And every week I'm here at the same time to edit subscriber submitted images. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you're one of our regulars, welcome back. I've got some interesting images today, and we may have a little theme going about water. We'll see if we can demonstrate Luminar Neo as well today, and let's just see where it goes. So I'm going to check out who's here in the chat. Some regulars, and from Vancouver, Stephanie's in cold and dreary Oregon, Deb in Alaska, Holly, Nigel. I've got some of your images, Nigel. They look really good. And yeah, so all the regulars. Let me hop over to my Lightroom and we will get started. Okay, let me make it a little bigger. So again, if you're new here, you can put questions and comments in the chat. My husband Rob will be there to provide links to anything that I mention and make sure that I get everybody's questions if I miss anything. So feel free to chat away in the chat and let us know if you like what I'm doing and if you have any questions. I did see yours come in late, Holly, and I decided to, leave it for next week. So, because I'd already pulled the images last night. I usually pull them the night before, just so I'm ready. So yours will be up next week. All right, so I know that Nigel is here, and Anne is here, and Stephanie's here. So I'm going to actually do one of Nigel's images. So tell us where you took this one, Nigel. Is it in the Caribbean somewhere? Because you sent 3 images this week, actually. I wanted to show you all of Nigel's images because he had, or 2 images this week. So a couple of seaside, right? This one's got some potential as well. But I kind of like to keep it to 1 image per person each week. So I'll save that one for next week, Nigel. But I like this one here with the interesting rocks in the foreground. And I think we can do some really cool things with this one. So let me know where you photographed this. Right. So my workflow is my images get pulled into Lightroom, and that's where I do my cataloging and sorting and flagging and tagging and so on, all the collections and things. And then I do my basic editing, and from there I decide if I want to go to either Photoshop to do any sort of major enhancements like cloning things out or removing things, or if I want to hop over to something like Luminar and add some special effects and looks. Okay, so one thing I would like to mention, actually, for those of you that are using Neo or previous versions of Luminar, if you are using Neo and are waiting for an update on the product, just in case you're not aware, the Skylum team is actually located in Ukraine. So based on the events of what's happening this last week, they've sent out some information that the next update may be a little bit delayed because obviously they've got some things going on in their country that may prohibit them from working. So my thoughts are with them and hope that all the team is safe. That's the major priority. So just to let you know, that little service announcement. All right, so first thing we're going to do, this is a raw Canon file. We can look at Nigel's shooting information. So taken with a Canon Rebel, okay, exposure 3/20th, f8, ISO 400, all looks good. Okay, so it should have nice depth of field. So we're going to start, let me turn my mouse thing on. We're going to start with the camera profile, okay? And he's used the standard one. Let's see if the landscape one gives any more color. Yeah, it definitely gives us more blue. Okay, faithful. See how I'm just kind of moving my mouse over them, trying to see which is the best. Okay? Portrait actually does some nice things to the clouds, okay? But landscape gives us a better overall blue, I think. So we're going to go with landscape. And then, of course, I'm going to do my shift double click trick. So hover over the word white, hold shift down and double click, and then blacks. Okay, so right off the bat, just making those 3 changes, we've gone from something that was a little bit flat. It wasn't really underexposed. It was just a bit of a flatter scene. Okay, so he didn't do anything incorrect in camera, but we can just spunk it up a little bit with those 3 quick changes, right? Now, I want to darken the sky and affect the sky. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. I can go to the HSL panel, but if I go in here and choose luminance, okay, so the L in the HSL is luminance or brightness, and I can use this targeted adjustment tool. So when I click on it and hover over anywhere on the image, right, it will give me this little cursor here with a cross and a circle and up and down. So what that means is anywhere I click and hold, it's going to affect the sliders that are contained, that has the color underneath my cursor. Okay, so if I click here, because I want to darken this, okay, you notice, of course, it's affecting blue. Okay, notice what happens too is that you can go too far. Okay, so that's too far, and it's also kind of doing a weird saturation thing. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. Let me actually try it down here. Yeah, see, it's not picking up this tone down here that I want. So it's not working exactly, and it's darkening the water as well. Okay, so that's my first option. I'm just going to hit Command or Control Z or Z for Americans. Okay. And let's go into another option instead, which is the masking tools. So click on the masking and choose Select Sky. So now Lightroom is going to mask out the sky for me, and it's done a really good job. And now I can play with the exposure. Okay, I can play with clarity, which will punch the clouds up. Okay, so if you're not sure what something's doing, definitely take your sliders to the extremes, right? Look what that's doing to the clouds. I would also try dehaze, because dehaze tends to add contrast and black, because what it's doing literally is just adding blacks. It's before the dehaze slider existed. I would do the same thing, right? Look how similar that looks just by adding black, right? So we can make this actually look like almost a stormy sky if we go too far. I want to keep the whites up. Okay. If I want to make sure that I'm not clipping any whites, just hit the J key on your keyboard. Okay. And now you can see if there's any areas of the white. Let me just move this box out of the road. Okay. You can just grab this box and move it around if it's in the road. Okay. So I'm going to drag the white sliders up. Now you can see the sky is starting to clip. Okay. So I want to just punch it up a little bit. And let's give it a bit more of that dehaze or the clarity. Maybe even texture. Okay. The other thing I find is I'm not crazy about that blue, so maybe let's give it a little bit of pink. Okay, now you can see some clipping showed up there, so I'm just scale back the whites a little bit. I'm going to give it a little bit more pink, because look what's happening. We're creating more of a sunset now. Right? Maybe even a little bit of yellow, like so. So look what happens if I shift this color. Okay. I could also try and shift the color down here. Okay. See what that's doing? So I can shift the color this way as well. I like what was happening up there. So let's just give that a bit of color. Okay. Let's see our before and after. We'll close the mask. Okay. Look at the difference on the sky. Now I think it's too pink. It doesn't go with the foreground as well. But we can adjust that. We can fix that. So I'm going to adjust the overall picture to daylight. And now the foreground looks a little bit pinker for sure. I'm going to take that out. So if you've watched before, the presets here are the same white balance presets that you would have in the camera. And I find often daylight works well for scene like this because it is daylight, but there's too much magenta. Okay, so I just dial some out. I usually find about 5 is pretty good. And now that I've adjusted the overall white balance, which I should have done first, I can go back here and take some of that pink out. Okay, maybe I want to do it from here. Let's see what happens. Okay, now look what happens if I do more yellow. Okay, it totally changes the look, but I can dance around with different settings here. Okay, that looks good. Let's darken it a little bit more. Oh, I don't want the clouds so dark. Well, it's not really affecting that. We'll just dial the blacks back a little bit. Okay, so very quickly, just a couple of adjustments and a sky adjustment, we've done really well. Let's see what happens if I choose a new mask and select subject. I want to see what Lightroom thinks is the subject, okay? It thinks it's the big rock. Now, if I wanted to affect all of the water and the rocks, that's not going to do it. So I would either have to add to the selection, or I'm actually going to undo and do another mask, okay? Think this through. So if I wanted to select everything except the sky, what else can I do? Okay, I can simply select the sky and then just click this button over here to invert it. Right? In an image like this, it's pretty straightforward because the sky and the foreground are quite opposite, okay? And the subject is everything down here. So now I can do things like bring up the texture, okay? Look at that rock, bring up the clarity, okay? Give it some more white. Okay, I could turn on my clipping warnings, give it a bit of contrast there, like so. Okay, I'm going to add one more mask, and I'm going to use a linear gradient because I want to darken this foreground just a little bit so that your eye comes in and goes into this sort of little channel here. Okay, so I'm just going to drag up from the bottom. Okay, so a linear gradient always comes from the edge of the image, and then I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit, and I've got a wide fade here. Okay, so the lines farther apart means there's a wider fade. And if I do it like this, just to show you, okay, see how the fade is very narrow and you get sort of this harsh line, versus if I open the lines, now it's more gradual. Okay, so graduated filter, right? Hence the name. Let's just drag it back here. So notice I'm taking it right off the chart here, off the image, because I really just want it to come in subtly from the bottom. Okay. So overall, that looks like a pretty good basic edit, right? Now, let's take this over to Luminar and see if we can't sort of give it a little bit of style. So a lot of things that you can do with Luminar, you can probably do in Lightroom. I find that some of the tools work actually better in Luminar, things like the details, filters and tools, and also my favorite one, which is, of course, the mystical. Okay, so we're going to hop over to, oh, did I choose Neo or did I choose, I can't remember if I chose it. Yes, I did choose Neo. Okay, it's coming open. Let's see what we got going on in the chat here. So Nigel says this image was taken in Barbados. Wonderful. Well, Barbara, you just did figure out how to chat. Nice to have you. And I have your image as well of the bird. So I'm going to do that one. Lynette, welcome back. I know I've seen you before. And Sheila. Awesome. I had to move lots of snow. Yeah, we had some snow in Edmonton, so for sure. Okay, let's grab Neo. Let me just make sure it's going to fit on my screen over here. Okay, there we go. So I've got two monitors, so I just want to make sure it's coming over. Okay, so if you're using Luminar AI, you'll notice that a few things are different. You won't see templates anymore, right? The presets are over here. Now, if you apply a preset, it's different than the way it works in Luminar AI, because if you choose a preset, right, let's see what this does. It overwrites everything else. Okay, I'm just going to undo that for the moment. Okay. So I'm going to do, let's just do my favorite, for example. Let's just do a mystical. Lift the shadows a little bit. and maybe dramatic. I'll make this a nice dramatic image. Okay, now you'll see that there's two edits, mystical and dramatic. But if I go back and apply the preset again, okay, it pops up and it tells me I'm about to overwrite everything. Okay, so when that happens, everything else I did before is gone. Okay, so you have to be careful with the presets now. And all you can do with it is dial it up or down. So if I like what this one is doing, right, I can just apply it sort of subtly. I can dial it up or down. I can't mask it. All I can do is delete it if I don't like it. Okay, so maybe I like this one and we'll leave it sort of as our base because it's punched up the contrast nicely. Okay. And then let's go and do some things like, for example, Enhance AI has the sky enhancer. Let's see what it does to the sky. Okay, so it's doing the same thing that was happening in Lightroom, is it's darkening down this top part and it's going oversaturated. So I don't want to get too carried away with that. I'll just do a slight bit there. Okay. What I am going to do is come down into the color tool. Okay, so this is very similar, and we have the HSL panels, but the benefit of doing this in Luminar, whether that be AI or Neo, is that you can mask it. Okay, so if I want to go back and do the luminance of the sky, which I said before, right, darkening it. Okay, now notice when I do the darkening here, the same problem that happened in Lightroom is not happening. Okay, so it's not oversaturating, but I do have to watch that it's starting to get pixelated or banded. Can you see how this is affecting the sky? Right? Because I'm not working on the original raw anymore, you have to be careful of not going too far. Okay? Cyan is down in that little bit there. Let's see if we've got any yellow. Okay, so if I'm happy with that in the sky, but I don't want it to being applied on the foreground, right? Currently, the only masking tool available in Luminar Neo is the paint mask. Okay? They are putting back the radial mask and the gradient mask, but for now we just have the paint mask. So I'm just going to use erase, and I'm going to use it fairly strong and a big brush, okay? Because what I want to do is remove it from this foreground area, okay? Because I don't want it applying to the water. Okay? Let me just do that. Another pass. Okay, so now if I turn the filter on and off, you can see that it's just applying to the sky. Okay. We can also shift the color like I did in Lightroom. Okay, so I can shift the blues to be more purple or more cyan-y. Let's give it a bit more purple and just see if there's any purple in the sky. See if there's any yellow. Remember, go back and forth and see what you're picking up. Interestingly enough, there's orange in the clouds. Okay, so if I want more color, right, so I could be using these sliders just to determine the color. If I want more orange in the clouds, look at that. So I've just punched the saturation on the clouds. Okay. Let's do a before and after on that. Okay, so that's one drawback of the HSL tools in Lightroom is you can't mask them, but you can in here. Okay, I can also then say, well, I want to enhance the rocks and bring the color out in the rocks. Okay, I can apply the color tool a second time. Okay, so I'm guessing that the rocks are going to be fairly orange. Okay, so look what happens when I do orange. Okay, I can brighten the rocks like so. But I don't want to brighten this one, and I don't want to brighten the sky. So instead of painting out or erasing, this time I'm going to paint in. And I'm just going to do a pass over these rocks here. Okay, so I did that at 80%, and then I'm just going to do one on this rock at 30%. So I'm just going to give it a slight boost. See how that's affecting just the middle rocks the most? And now when I close it, Okay, now you can see that we've got the preset, the sky enhancer, the first color adjustment that I did, which was on the sky, and the second color adjustment, which I did on the rocks. Okay. Let's see. I could do a vignette. Oh, let's put some structure and detail in these rocks. Okay. Currently, again, you can't copy and paste a mask. That is something that is coming as well. I'm going to give the rocks a little bit of structure. So same deal. I'm just going to paint it in here. And maybe even in this water in the passage here. Okay, so giving that a nice punch. Okay. See how the rocks are really coming out now? I'm trying to drive the eye forward into this middle here, right? So you can imagine sailing a boat right through here into the open ocean or something, okay? Now I'm going to get into my favorite. So Mystical, I want to have a look at this one because I wasn't really happy with what it was doing. That's not bad. I'm going to also take a look at the Glow tool. Okay, so there's two tools that do sort of this soft focus effect. One is Mystical and the other is under Glow. But when you go under Glow, you've got four choices. Okay, so you've got soft focus, Glow, which sort of makes the brightest areas glow. See how that's affecting the sky mostly. Okay. Orton effect. Oops, I didn't grab it. Orton effect, which is actually really great on people pictures. I find that it adds a lot of brightness, so I can dial that down. Right. So if I want Orton effect, that gives it a little different look. Right. Orton effect is actually here's your trivia for the day. It's named after a guy that invented this technique, and it was done with film, with slide film. So what he would do is he would take one picture that was sharp and one that was out of focus and sandwich them together, and it would give you this kind of look where the blacks are sort of glowing. Okay, where we look at soft focus, the whites are all glowy. See that? Versus Orton effect, the blacks are more glowy. Okay. And then Orton effect soft is kind of more overall, right? So this one I want to have more contrast. So looking at all of them, I still think I'm happiest with Mystical. Right? Now you'll notice that even though I zeroed these out, they still left them here in the history. So if you want to truly get rid of it, you have to delete it. Okay. So I'm actually going to delete this one and just apply Mystical again. Okay, so let's bring it up. Okay, I can say, okay, I don't want it quite as smooth or not so soft. So less smoothness, meaning it's going to be not as blurry. So the higher I bring this, the more softness. Okay. And I could also lift the shadows a little bit. I just want ever so slightly. Okay, let's see what that's doing. Okay. I like that. Okay. Now the final one I might want to play with is mood. Okay, and a LUT or a lookup table is a color effect. Again, this is something that is not currently in Luminar Neo, which is the preview. So it's kind of a pain in the butt because you can't see when you hover over what you're going to get. I've just used these a lot that I know that some of these add like a nice pink color. I think this one, okay? So if I want to add some of this tone into the sky, for example, I could just, again, mask it into the sky to give me more color there. Let's see, I know another one is more sort of sepia tone or brown. Right? Look, makes the image look like it's almost faded out. So if you wanted that kind of look, let's try one of these here, cross-processing. Oh, that's pretty colorful. That's pretty colorful. Right? And literally I just play with these to see what they look like. Okay? If we see something we like. And I've got this turned up fairly high because I really want to see what the effect is doing as I'm choosing these, and then I will dial it back a little bit. Okay. To me, that looks like a 70s picture, right? Very different. I don't know why the names, who comes up with these things, right? So they've named them after places. I think that's kind of a matte look. I'm not a fan of this one. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so I don't mind this one. I'm going to leave this one up a little bit. And let's just look at our before. So this is what came from Lightroom and after. So we're really just punching up the colors of this image. And it's maybe gotten a little bit dark. So I'm just going to go into develop. Okay. If you are using Windows machine, you will not see the histogram under curves, unfortunately. But on Mac, you should be able to see the histogram. So I'm just going to bring the shadows up a little bit and maybe the exposure overall. Just a tiny bit. Make sure I keep my highlights and the sky down. There we go. I'm happy with that. Okay, so applying. Let's see, do we have any comments here? Rob says he's put a question for me. Question for me? Where's the question? Please give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it so far. Is there banding in Nigel's image because of the depth difference from RAW to JPEG? Well, I actually took it over as a 16-bit file. So it shouldn't be because I did take it over as a TIFF and 16-bit. So I wasn't working on a JPEG. You'll see that when it comes back into Lightroom, it's actually a TIFF. But let's see if there's some of that banding. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. Let's see if it's in the original. There is some noise there, right? If I zoom into 200%, there is some noise there. Okay, so basically all it's done is it's sort of enhanced the, oops, went the wrong way. It's enhanced that noise that's already there. Okay? If I look at them side by side, like this. Okay, so the original is on the left and the Luminar one is on the right. So you can see that it's just enhanced it. And that's probably my bad because I applied the structure. And I could have done some denoise while I was in there as well. Right? And I can also see there's a little bit of chromatic aberration here. So I should have fixed that in Lightroom before I went to Luminar. Let's see if we can correct that now. Do you all see what I'm saying here? Okay, so this is chromatic aberration on the rock here. So there's a green fringe on one side and a red fringe on the other side. And it doesn't mean that it's Christmas. It means that we've got a chromatic aberration issue. Okay. Lens profile. So it doesn't recognize the lens. Let's just see. It's probably a Canon lens. Let's see if it does now. Okay, now it does. So we're getting closer. If we still have a fringe, color fringe, you can go in to do manual in Lightroom and just see just the edge, right? So I can click on that red fringe. There, it's seeing if it's blue. There, it found it a little bit. Okay, so if I turn this guy off, and you can see that it's doing a lens adjustment as well and correcting that chromatic aberration. I'm going to head back to the raw file. Let me see if that does a better job. Okay, now it found the camera profile and it did a better job. So I should have done the chromatic aberration on the original raw file as opposed to trying to correct it after the fact. Okay, so that's my bad on that one. Yes, so take Rob's question off here. Question, cyane. Did I say cyane? So cyan is sort of that blue that's a little like aqua color. So cyane would be sort of that color. Let's see. Welcome, Catherine. No worries. Good to see you. Topaz to remove the noise. Yeah, actually, we could run this through Topaz. And if I was doing this in a non-destructive way, I would have taken this to Photoshop first and then run it through Luminar. Okay, but let's run this now, this edited version, through Topaz DeNoise. Okay, now it's going to ask me if I want to edit a copy or if I want to edit the original. So I'm going to edit the original because I really didn't do any edits in Lightroom. I just played with that chromatic aberration. So it's going to open this TIFF that I made in Luminar. Okay, so it's going to open the TIFF in Topaz DeNoise. I hope I opened the right one. Yes, I did. Okay, so it's loading. Oh, wow, look at that. Look at the job it did. Okay, so this is just auto. I left it on. Let's just see if I turn on full auto, what it gives me. Lightroom is running out of memory because I got lots of stuff going here. Okay, so it didn't remove everything when I did auto. So let's just crank that up a little bit. And you can see that you can adjust the sharpness, right? Because the more that you add, the more noise reduction you add, right? Let me just show you what happens if I crank the noise reduction up and the sharpness down. The more noise reduction you add, the blurrier your image starts to get. So see how we're starting to lose detail in the clouds, right? So if I enhance the sharpness and recover detail, it should come back better detail in the clouds. So it's a balance between removing all the noise and still having detail in your image. Okay? Let's dial that back just a little bit. Right, definitely a big difference here. Let's try this preset. So this one here is just you have less options. Okay, so you can choose low, medium, or high, and then you could choose to recover the detail or high enhanced sharpness. So that one actually looks pretty good, right? As we move it around, right, I want to see how it's affecting the rocks. So see how much there's still detail in the rocks, and it's definitely removing lots of grain and noise in the sky. I'm very happy with that. Let's actually go with that. I'm just going to zoom out. Large preview warning. Yes, it's telling me it's going to take a while to draw. This is the one drawback of Topaz DeNoise and Topaz Sharpen, is that they do take a while to generate things. Okay? Yeah, look at the difference. I do see a little bit of unsharpening happening on the rocks, though. So I might go back here and stick with what we had. It takes a little bit of while to play with it in terms of sharpen. Do we have any questions? Mike, did I create a virtual copy? Is that a good idea prior to sending to Photoshop? No, you don't have to create a virtual copy because when you send to Photoshop, you actually are opening the raw file in Photoshop. If you make a copy, you're not really doing anything different. So virtual copy, in that case, doesn't serve any purpose because you're already doing non-destructive editing in Photoshop. Okay, so apparently I shouldn't have chosen the large preview because it's taking forever to draw. Any other questions while we're waiting for Topaz to do its thing? Great suggestion, Sheila, to use Topaz. And we just cover more tips today. Okay, that looks pretty good. The other advantage of, if I had done this in Photoshop, I'll do the next one that way just to show you my workflow, is that I would have Luminar as a smart plugin and Topaz as a smart plugin, and I could actually mask it as well, right? So if I want to mask this one, I can. I'm not going to muck around anymore because I find that it's going to take forever to draw and it's going to take forever to render this. So let's just see if I can hop back over to Lightroom and wait for it to do its thing. Nope. You know what? I'm just going to cancel out of this because it's going to take forever. We got the idea by seeing it on the screen. Okay. So yeah, you got a really nice image there, Nigel. You got lots to work with. Okay, Barbara's here, and I've got one of Stephanie's. Have we seen Rita today? So this is Barbara's image. Let's move on to this next one, right? I guess it's an egret, right? An egret. So where did you photograph this little guy? Let's do the same process. So she's used a Nikon and a Tamron lens. Okay, so remember just hitting I on the keyboard. I've set up my, it's called the, what is this called? This is called the loop view. Yeah, I guess it's called loop view. When you do the info, you get to choose if you want to choose what goes on this. Okay, it's called the loop info. Okay, show info overlay. You can choose what goes on it. Okay, so for example, I can choose. I've chosen file name, the capture date, and the camera and lens setting for this one. And for the first one, I've chosen. Oops. There we go. Exposure information. Okay. So you can change what shows on there by changing the loop information. Okay? Loop information. So we can see her exposure, the lens she used, camera, what time and date she took it. So it looks like you took it on 2/2/22. Nice date. All right. So let's work on this one, the same method. Okay. So camera profile. Let's find landscape. Okay, so landscape gives it a bit more punch. Flat is indeed flat. Neutral, portrait. I think landscape's the winner again. Okay, so if you have a lot of blues or greens in your image, even if it's not a landscape, that option is often the best choice. Okay, I'm going to do the shift, double click. Okay, now I'm just going to double check using my Alt Option key to make sure that the whites on that guy aren't clipping, and they're not. If you start to see that, that means his feathers are clipping with no detail. Okay. I'm also going to pull the highlights down a little bit because I want to detail in his feathers. I'm not actually going to do that on global. Okay, so these are all global edits. I'm going to do that as a local adjustment. Okay. Let's check the blacks. Okay, so blacks I want to clip some. Whites I don't. Okay. I'm going to give it a bit of overall clarity. Okay, so let's just see what we've got so far just by using the basic panel. Okay. More punch and more color. Next thing I'm going to do is crop it. Okay. Now I'm using a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Rob, could you please share a link to the page where people can get the Lightroom keyboard shortcuts cheat sheet if they want to download that? Okay. I'm using the keyboard shortcuts, and R is the one to get the crop tool. Okay. I am going to maintain the aspect ratio. Okay, so you notice how I can change the size and the shape. If you want to maintain the same aspect ratio, right, proportions, you can either click this little lock to lock it, or just hold down the shift key, and then when you drag the corner, it stays the same shape. Okay, so I'm going to come in about like that. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to get him a little bit more off center. Okay. Now I might change my mind and say, no, I'm going to go a little more actually square. Okay. I don't want to cut his feet off, but I want more room in front of him. Okay, so he's looking this way. I want more space for him to look into than there is behind him, ideally. I'd love to crop in more, but I don't want to get too tight. And I end up with sort of a square if I do that, right? I'm not really wanting a square. So I'm trying to find a happy medium where, you know, he's on this third line here and his eye is almost on this intersection here and he's got space to look into. Let's go down and add an edge vignette. Actually, let's do the lens corrections and see if there is any issues. Okay, do we see any chromatic aberrations? So we're looking for fringes on the outsides of things. I don't see any here, and that's typical of a longer lens. Okay, usually the wider the lens, the more chromatic aberration you'll see. And you see this one is a longer lens at 200. Okay, so there I don't really see any, but we can just check it off just to make sure. Okay, and you'll notice that as soon as I checked off enabled profile, it did recognize that she was using a Tamron, this lens. Okay, so that's embedded in the information on the file. It's the metadata, and Lightroom recognized that lens. Okay, now you'll notice that it actually lightened up the image. Okay, see how it's correcting distortion and lightening up the image, right? That's this vignette thing here. Okay, so if I don't want it to do that, if I want to actually keep the edges a little bit darker, I can dial this back, right? Most lenses have a little bit of edge darkening, sort of by nature of the lens optics, okay? Then I'm going to take it a little farther and go down to the effects panel and add more of a vignette, okay? Now, keep in mind that in Lightroom, you can't off-center the vignette, okay? So I'm dialing down feather so I can see the size and the shape of the vignette. So I can make it smaller so that it fits him, but I can't move it over, okay? So in this case, I'm just going to keep this vignette really subtle. So I'm darkening the edges a little bit without coming in too far and making it obvious. So see, the idea with the vignette on the edges is that you want the center part of your image to be brighter, right? So your eye goes more to the subject. And we could play with the HSL panel again here and see if we can get more blue, okay? Let's just see. Okay, so luminance, we know that that's going to be the water, right? So if I want to lower the luminance, now notice that when I lower the luminance or brightness, the color intensifies, okay? So that goes back to, you know, if you have lack of color, make sure you add some blacks. Do we have some aqua as well? So one interesting thing is if you lower these things too far, you see how the water starts to look monochromatic or flat. So what I'm actually going to do is leave the aqua tint higher and the blue lower. Okay, so it maintains the highlights on the water in those ripples. Okay, and I do that with grass as well. I'll take yellow up and green down. Let's see if that affects the grass here. Okay, so see, oh look, he's got yellow in his feathers too. That's interesting. So green down. Okay, so it darkened the green. In this case, I might actually go the other way and brighten the greens, so it actually sort of dodges the shadows here. And let's darken the yellows, because look what's happening here. He's getting this sort of sunset-y glow on the bird, which is kind of cool, right? Let's see about orange. Okay, so orange is going to affect him, but it's also affecting his beak. So I'm not going to want to do orange, at least not too much, okay? But that was kind of a happy thing that we found there, is now the bird looks like he's standing in a sun glowy sunset, which I didn't even know was there, right? Let's see what Lightroom does for select subject. See if it picks him out. It did a good job of picking him out, right? And the reason I want to do that is I want to pick up some texture and some clarity. And let's just see what dehaze does on the bird, okay? So dehaze tends to darken the shadows, remember, and give a bit more contrast. So I might bring that up a tiny little bit. Let's zoom in to 50% or so we can see. Ooh, let's go 60%. Okay, let's see that bird, maybe 100. Okay, let's see that bird, what that's doing. So turning the mask off and on. See the difference? Like so. Look at it, really brought these feathers out down here. How are we looking? Pretty good. Okay, I'm going to try one more experiment and choose select sky, because sometimes when you have water like this, Lightroom actually mistakenly selects the water as sky, and in this case it didn't. It knew that it wasn't the sky. Okay, so if I want to affect the water, I would have to do a different kind of mask. Okay, so let's try color range, okay, because the water is mostly blue, and you can click or you can actually drag over a section. Okay, so now it's done a pretty good job, but it's flowing a little bit over into the bird. So we can do refine using this slider here. So to the right, it's choosing more. To the left, it's choosing less. But I want to get all the water. So I'm going to leave it where it was. And I'm going to do a subtract, okay? Because we know that the bird, when I did select subject, was selected him. So I'm actually going to subtract him from this selection. Okay, so I'm going to select subject, and now you see that the bird is totally clear. Okay, so now we've got the water, and I'm actually going to blur the water. So I'm going to take it down in clarity. I might even take it down in sharpness. And let's see, dehaze is going to make it too fuzzy. Yeah, so let's go down in texture, clarity, and sharpness. And let's see what that's doing. Let's see how it's just you still have the ripples in the water, but they're not as sharp. Okay, so it's taking away less from him. So before and after. So that's what I would do. I think I'm happy with that one. Do we want to pop over to Photoshop with this one? No, I think I've got another one that we'll do over to Photoshop. Any questions? Is there a limit to the number of characters when making a comment? I'm not sure. I see your second one is quite long. I do see the whole thing. Holly says, my timer on 28 to 300 puts a vignette on my images. Once they render in Luminar, it looks like the edges are a bit dark. Yes, it is normal for some lenses. So if you're in Luminar, make sure you go to that develop raw tool if you're in Luminar Neo, and the lens optics things are there. So make sure you check off those things for lens optics for corrections, the distortion and the chromatic aberration, because that will take care of that issue. Okay. You edited in Smart. Sheila says, I edited in Photoshop, made a smart object. I did not save my original file as a PSD. So when I save a copy as a JPEG, a lot of different things started to happen. Was this due to saving as a JPEG? Yes, likely. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by you edited as a smart object and you didn't save the original. So the original, let me run through one of those Let me run through the workflow, Sheila, and then see if that answers your question. Okay. Let's just use this one. Okay. Because we're already here. So if I want to do some edits on this guy, I'm going to choose edit in as a smart object in Photoshop. Okay. So it's going to open the raw file as a layer and a smart object. Okay. Wait for the image to open. Okay, there it is. Let me just change my workspace. I know Sheila was in our Photoshop class recently. For the rest of you, if you're confused about Photoshop, we've done a Photoshop 101 and 201 class, and we talked a lot about the tools in Photoshop. So if you're interested in picking those up, I gotta sneeze. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh, I didn't mute. Sorry about that, guys. I tried to mute, but I sneezed before I pressed the button. So if you are interested in learning more about Photoshop, Rob, if you could share the link. We're doing Photoshop 301, which will be coming up in April, actually, after we do the Luminar Neo courses, okay? And if you're interested, we will have Photoshop 101, 201, and 301 as a bundle. Now I'm crying. In terms of the Luminar Neo course as well, I know Holly has purchased that one. If any of you have purchased the Luminar Neo course from us, we're actually working on videos right now. I've got 3 of them recorded, and we should have those up ready for you. And I'll be sending an email out on Monday so you can start watching them. But there's a secret, okay? If you just go into the DPM website and go to your profile and log in, you will see the Luminar Neo course there, and you can actually start the lessons now. So there's not much on the pages other than the videos right now. There will be links to download the practice images. I think there's about 25 raw files and the bonus things that come with it. So if you want to do the Neo course, Rob has put a link in the chat for that as well. If you already have purchased it, you can get in now and start watching the videos. So a little sneak into the back door. Okay. Apologize for my sneezing and sniffing. Okay. So now we are in Photoshop, and you can see that this guy is open on a layer, and this little icon right here indicates that that is a smart object. Okay. So anything that I apply to this image as a filter, for example, will come on here below it as a smart object with a mask already applied. So let's just apply, I'm going to do Luminar AI in this case. The Luminar Neo right now currently has a slight bug in terms of working with Photoshop. When you apply Neo, it does work, but it comes back and it says that it's Luminar AI. So it's just something in the back end that they need to fix the integration, because if you open it again, it opens AI. So actually, let's just apply a template. Let's just see. Software. Not liking any of those. That's kind of nice. So that plays up that warm sun. Okay, I'm going to go with that one. And let's just dial that back a little bit. See what else it's doing. It's punched up the contrast somewhere. It's got to be this one. Yeah. So I'm just going to dial that one back. I'm using the backslash key before and after. And now that we're in Luminar, I can do a vignette that's off center. So remember, feather to 0. I want to circle this bird. And I want to put it just on him. So now I can choose subject and place it off center. Okay, so that's the cool thing about the vignette in here. I could do the same thing in Luminar just using a radial filter, okay, a radial mask. Okay, I'm going to go in and further apply my favorite filter. And in this case, look what it's doing to the water. That's really cool. I'm actually going to erase it mostly from the bird because I want to keep the nice sharpness on his feathers, right? I would do a better job of masking this because I'm just doing a quick and dirty here, okay? So let's see the before and after on this. I like it. I like it. Okay, so now once I apply this, it's going to come back to Photoshop, okay? I haven't done any layers on this, so I'm not really sure what occurred where you did some of the layers, but I'll just do an adjustment layer. Okay, so you can see that this is applied on the Smart Object layer as a filter, okay? And if I want to get back to Luminar AI, I just have to double click on the word Luminar AI and it will open Luminar and all the settings that I had and the sliders will be in the same place, okay? So it doesn't lose any of the Luminar editing either. Let's just make another adjustment on here. Can't even think of what I want to do. I want to do a photo filter, which is kind of orange. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay, so this is what's called an adjustment layer. So it's come here with a mask, right? And I'm just adding this sort of pink tint. So now I can see there's different layers, right? I'm going to dial the opacity of this guy down a little bit. Maybe I'll just, there we go. So that's just adding some orange, okay? So what's happening here is I've got multiple layers, and because I opened it from Lightroom, okay, and I have my Lightroom preferences set to use a Photoshop format document, so it could just be something in your preferences, Sheila. So now when I just go save, okay, it's going to automatically save this as a PSD. We can look at your Lightroom preferences as well to see if that's happening. And then when I close it, okay, we come back to Lightroom, and you can see now I have a PSD file, okay? And if I want to open this file again and edit where I left off, okay, this is where the workflow is different. So this time, I don't want to open it as a smart object. I just want to open it in Photoshop. So then I'm going to choose the top one, okay? So if you've already got a PSD with layers and things done to it, make sure you do not do edit a copy, you do the original. So then when I choose edit original, it opens back up in Photoshop, and you can see I still got the layers and I've got the Luminar filter, okay? So I'm not sure if I answered your question. You didn't save it as a PSD. So check your preferences, Barbara, because in your Lightroom preferences, an external editing, that's the one you want to check. And where it says edit in Photoshop, make sure it's saving as a PSD. I have mine set to Pro Photo. Okay, so if you've taken both of the Photoshop classes, we talked about the color spaces. So the largest one is always at the top and 16-bit. So make sure you're set to PSD, Pro Photo, 16-bit, and that will bring up the largest quality file. Okay, so if you've taken your image to Photoshop, make sure you're taking it as this PSD. Okay, how it got saved as a JPEG, I'm a bit baffled with, but if I haven't answered your question on that, send me an email, Sheila, and we'll troubleshoot it together. Okay. Yeah, I'm not saving it as I'm saving it as a PSD because that's what's set up in my preferences in Lightroom. Okay, I don't have another option. I just hit save and it saves it automatically as a PSD because that's what I've told Lightroom to do. Okay, so it could be that you've got your settings wrong, but you can't choose a JPEG, I don't think. Let me go back to preferences. Maybe you can here. If I change this to 8 bits. Yeah, it still won't let me choose a JPEG. So I'm not sure how you're getting a JPEG here. Make sure you always have the top level of everything, right? Except for PSD. TIFF works as well, but they're just bigger files and you don't need a TIFF, okay? TIFF. If you were just working from Bridge, for example, and you open the image, yeah, you could have just chosen to save it as the wrong format, right? But even in Photoshop, if you just open a raw file and then you say save, it will save it as a TIFF or a PSD. It won't let you save a JPEG unless you do save a copy, right? I did answer your question. Okay, great. Okay, so you did save as when you went to Photoshop? Was that the thing? So let me see if I can replicate that. Okay, so let's say we're back in here again. And we open the original. So when you're in Photoshop, did you do save as and then saved it as a JPEG? Because you would have to see how you can't save a JPEG. It won't let you. Okay? You'd have to save a copy. Okay? You'd have to choose save a copy, and then you can get JPEG. Okay? So yeah, when you open from Lightroom, all you have to do is hit save. You don't have to hit save as. So that could be save a copy. Yep, that's where you went wrong. Yep. So don't do save a copy, just do save, and it will bring it back into Lightroom. Because then you've got the edited version here, and if you want to do anything further in Lightroom, you still can, right? Like crop at different aspect ratios or make a virtual copy and make it black and white, right? So I can make a virtual copy and change it to black and white, okay? For example. And he looks kind of cool in black and white too. Okay. Let's take a look at the difference. So let's take a look at the 3 images. So the original was the Lightroom edit, Luminar edit, and then for fun, black and white. Okay. Well, we're coming up on an hour already, and we did 2 images, but I've covered lots of different options for workflow. I'm going to do one more real quick for today, another water image, just to show you the difference, because this one here is actually a JPEG. Okay, so this one was submitted by Bjorn, and he submitted a JPEG from the Olympus M1 Mark II, right? So I want to show you what happens when you're editing a JPEG versus a raw file, okay? So the number one thing is I don't have camera profiles here, okay? So there are no camera profiles to work with, okay? So I've got color and monochrome, or I can go into the artistic ones built into Lightroom. So I don't have that. I don't have the white balance presets, okay? So you've only got auto and custom, and that's it. And then under the editing tools, you still have all the same tools, but you can't take your image as far, okay? Because if I try and pull down things like highlights, I may run out of data, okay? If this is something where the original image was clipped or off the chart, okay, I'm just going to undo that for a moment. If this original image was clipping as a JPEG, I would not be able to retain detail. Because it's inside the graph, I think it's doing okay, but I can't push this one as far as I could with a raw file. And this is when you'll start to get more noise, more grain, more bending, that kind of stuff. Okay. Let's just see what it chooses for subject here. I'm always curious. I like to just do this and shoot the rock, right? So that's not exactly what I was hoping for, right? So I like to just play around and see what it thinks is the subject. I'm going to try luminance range because I want to select the water, right? That's done pretty well. Let's make sure I don't have any of the rocks. So something of that nature, right? And the reason I'm doing that is I want to add some dehaze because look what happens to the water. Right, and some clarity, some texture, and I'm going to bring those highlights down again. Okay, so see how that's doing a really nice job, and it's actually picking up some color up here. Okay. Let's actually even give it a different color. So there's another way. We played with this slider here, and we played with these sliders at the top. You can actually choose color here. So let's say I want to make this water blue. I can do that, right? So that's a little intense. And now I can also see over here where I'm missing a bit. So I can refine my selection. Okay, so I just want to have a little tint of blue in that water. Okay. So I'm going to go back up here and refine this selection. There we go. So I wanted to make sure I'm getting that. Okay, something weird is happening there. That's better. And I'm actually going to subtract subject because then it's going to take it away from that rock. Because we knew that the rock was apparently the subject, right? So let's see how that's doing. The blue is a little intense. Let me dial the saturation down a little bit. Well, that's kind of cool, actually. Right? So I'm going to close the mask. See what a difference that makes? Now this area up here is a different color. So I'm just going to try and solve that with a new mask and a linear gradient. Get this out of the road. So I'm just going to do a linear gradient. And I'm going to try and shift it a little more magenta. And now this is just me having experience with color. Because I know that if it's slightly green, the opposite is magenta. So if I give it some magenta and maybe some blue, I'm going to get rid of that yellow and green tint in there. Okay, so yellow and green tend to go together when they are on an image. You see they're opposite on these sliders, and magenta and blue. Okay, so if you see something in your image that feels cool, okay, make sure you not only do yellow, you add some green, okay, because they're usually together. And this just goes way back to my old photo printing days. I know about color theory. Okay. So before, after, that's pretty cool. Okay, now I'm going to do another selection. I'm going to do luminance range again, but this time I'm going to do the rocks. Okay, so again, notice how it selected all the rocks, but then it also selected the water, and I don't want the water up here. Okay, so I'm going to do a subtract and think through it. It's going to be easy to subtract a linear gradient from the top. Oh, and I got a bit over there too, so I'm just going to keep going down until I have just the rocks. Okay, see how that works? So it's just my brain thinking through the process of how to select just the rocks. Okay. I can still go back to the linear gradient or the luminance range, sorry, and adjust these sliders as well. Okay. All right, so I'm on the mask. Now I want to give it a bunch of texture, a bunch of clarity, and let's try dehaze on the rocks. Okay, it really makes them look like wet and sparkly. It's actually kind of cool. I'm going to use a preset to apply a vignette. Let's do a medium vignette. And I'm still not happy with all these color shifts up here. So you know what I'm going to do is I could either just do a negative saturation. Okay. or we can actually turn this to black and white. Okay, because this one for me is really about the tones, so it works really well in black and white. One thing you want to watch when you do black and white conversion is always use the black and white conversion, not desaturate, okay, because you then have the sliders, I'll show you that in a minute, to work with. And you notice that I went back and added some more whites, okay, because you want to make sure that you've got good contrast in your black and white. So the HSL panel has now turned into the black and white panel. And if we remember, the original colors in the water was blue and cyan. Okay, so see how if I use the blue slider, it's actually affecting this bit in the water. Okay, so it's bringing a bit more detail out in that water. It's actually a pretty cool image. Okay. So I think, where are we? Let me get back over here. I think that's it for today. Holly says she likes the seafoam green. Yeah, I liked it too because it goes with the ocean, right? Oops, we got a spammer in the midst here. Sheila says, a new work path, never save back to Lightroom. Yes, always save back to Lightroom because Lightroom, if you're using it, is your base, okay? If you want to share the link, or maybe you already did, Rob, there's a whole video I did on the Lightroom to Photoshop workflow in YouTube on our channel. I think, is that the one you shared, Rob? So I think this one is probably, yeah, he did. So that's the one you want to watch, Sheila, because I spent probably, I think, 20 to 30 minutes just on that workflow, right? Let's see. Apparently everybody's liking that one, right? So there's a lot of difference. How do I toggle back to the original? That's a great question. Let me just go back here. If you're in Lightroom, I'm just using the / key. Okay, so when you're in your develop module, make it bigger. Right? If you're in the develop module, just the / key. Okay. And that's on that keyboard shortcuts, right? You're welcome. Yes, JPEGs can be processed just the same in Lightroom as a RAW file. You just can't often go as far with them. And if you've got some challenges already with the quality of the image, whether it's overexposed or underexposed, you'll lose quality quickly with a JPEG versus a RAW. But if you maybe you started shooting JPEGs when you first started out doing photography and you've got some old images that are JPEGs, by all means, pull them into Lightroom and have a go, right? Especially the more you learn about editing, your skills will improve. Go back and take a look at some of your older images and reprocess them because you may be surprised at what you can actually pull out, especially with the new Luminar or the Lightroom masking tools that are really fantastic. You're welcome, Barbara. Okay, now your job is to try and replicate that. I always say that's homework. If I do your image live, your job is to go and try and match my edits. I know Anne did a really good job with her image of the harbor of Vancouver, and she put it on her Facebook. So I'd like to see you do the same, Barbara. So in the video description below, you'll get a link to the Luminar and the Lightroom keyboard shortcuts if you are watching this afterwards, right? So thanks everybody for watching today. Please remember to submit your images. I know that Holly already sent some for next week, so keep them coming. There were some great images to work with today, and I've got yours, Anne, for next week, the one that you said that you wanted to maybe make a print. So we'll play around with that one and maybe do some abstracts next week. So until then, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, like the video, hit the little bell on this live video because then you'll get notifications of when the next one is live. Okay, so YouTube will remind you when to join in. Take care until next week.